Well, David, I read somewhere, this is why I'm looking at my notes, I've got to get it right. I read somewhere that this is the quote you said about your film. It's an insane, unruly teenager of a movie found on a trash heap.
Yes.
Is it going to win many awards?
No.
What do that's affectionate as well, I take it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I saw my role as like, in that description, insane, unruly teenager, that's partly describing the making of the film as much as the film itself. It was just like, felt like I was a parent and I had this like really like capricious child that I had to try and like get into shape and like make it work, because the budget was so low, and that meant everything was out of control all the time. So that was the kind of the insane teenager side of it. And the found on a trash heap, that was Paul the writer. He had this idea. We both sort of had similar ideas about how we really couldn't stand the way that a lot of films strain for this kind of Sundance respectability, and we just wanted to see what happens if you go the opposite way. How trashy can you get, and what happens if you make a film that you just like, as if you found it on a trash heap. What's the what can you get out of that as a model for making a film, basically?
Well, I think you're being quite modest, because when I saw the film, I did get that unruly nature, and also kind of Warhol vibe going on. Very sort of like these people all outside. They're all a bit weird, a bit wacky. It's kind of weird because you're watching it thinking today they'd all be considered having mental health issues. But of course, in Warhol's day, they were just interesting, arty types.
Sure, yeah.
So the film is saturated with these characters. But I wondered why, was it a budget consideration to make it black and white? Or did you actually see the film working better in black and white?
Genuinely whatever the budget had been, I would have shot it in black and white anyway.
Okay.
I remember reading the script.
Why is that though?
Because it's got like a noir feel. I remember reading the script, and there's so much sort of paranoia and spookiness, and it's always like people lurking in alley, just lurking in the nighttime, and it just seemed like you can really get the kind of grittiness that it needed, and I wanted it to feel like a kind of a lost film that has been rediscovered. So the black and white sort of, and also because black and white makes it, because it's like got elements of realism but not really, and so black and white makes it just like a layer separated from reality as well. And I really wanted people to be drawn into the world of the film, and sort of, just to sort of be into this a world of its own that's like separate to the world that we know.
Maybe we should tell people what is the world of this film, because in my view, it kind of isn't obvious as a horror film.
No.
So I suppose let's tell the audience what kind of film it is, and then maybe you can add your kind of insights into how the horror element sort of came into it.
Okay. It's just in terms of tone, and in terms of the way the story works and everything, it's really a comedy. And I think that wasn't originally the plan. The way it works, I work with Paul, our writer, and often the way that we work is that he'll write something very serious, and he doesn't realize how camp it is, what he's writing, and then I'll read it and think this is a comedy. So that then we'll spin it as a comedy, but when I direct it. But so he was interested in, I suppose, so yeah, like the emotional arc of the film is very much comedy. The horror elements come from something that is very much now, which is like body hacking and the sort of the way that we're becoming separated from our own flesh by technology. And so I guess that's the kind of horror angle. But we never really wanted to make like a gross out movie with loads of gore. It was more about mood and the ideas of it, really.
Yeah, because it actually is more creepy because of that. Tell us more about how you develop the main character, because I understand the actor. I mean, in the film, so that people know, he's kind of he's in a very bad place. Lost his job, his marriage is kind of on the rocks, and he's got a prosthetic arm.
That's right. Yeah, Russell, his name is. Yeah.
So how did you develop between you? How did you develop the main character, and what was his purpose in the film?
Russell is obviously, the actor's name really is Russell, but it's not actually based on Russell. But Paul there are elements of real life in the story because it was filmed in the actual house where at one point I lived in that house, and then I left and moved back to England, and then Paul lived in the same flat after me. So while he was living there, a lot of the, for legal reasons, it's entirely coincidental, but at the same time, there are certain inspirations of when we lived in that genuine house. A lot of the characters came from that. Sorry, I've slightly lost the thread. What was the question?
How did you come and create the main character? Because he drives, in a way, the film does revolve around him. So
that's right. Yeah, so Russell is the sort of, because there's so much wacky stuff happening, he's a comic character, but we wanted someone to be sort of things happening to him, because you need like a straight guy to an extent. And even though he does these extreme things, it's more about how he responds, and there's a kind of an apathy to the character as well. I think that what fed into that character and what created that was the fact that I think there's like a kind of, I don't want to like use a buzz phrase, but I think masculinity is a little bit in crisis at the moment, and certainly Paul and I sort of, and a lot of men, like once your wife earns more money than you do, and like you're living in a kind of like relatively like all right, life, but there's always, you're not quite sure what you're for, and I think there's a sort of element of like there's a sort of adriftness about Russell's character. He's not quite sure where he fits in anymore, and he feels a little bit lost. And his glory days are behind him. He's played in bands, and he used to be kind of like a sort of rock and roll figure, and that's all behind him now because he's reached 40.
So he's right. He's right for takeover from a
exactly.
limb.
Yeah, he's a vulnerable vessel.
Yeah, because
he's lost. He's prime material to be recruited into Gary's cult. And so it came. Paul did a draft of the script. I did a draft of the script, and it sort of both of us put bits of ourselves into it, really.
Right. Because I'm curious, because you're British. So how did you end up making a film about downtown California?
I lived there. I'm the only British person. That's not quite true. Sheridan, who plays Charlie, is also British, but he lives in LA full time. But the majority of the crew and the actors are from LA, and I moved there purely to be with my wife because she was working out there, and I didn't really have ambitions to make it in Hollywood or anything. So I just sort of was like hanging out at like book readings and stuff, and met Paul at a book reading, and so I lived there for 3 years, and in that time it just sort of, I don't know, you as an outsider in LA. You see it. I really wanted, when we made the film, to see LA from the outsider's perspective. I didn't want to show, the nice restaurants or the really attractive houses or anything. It was, and especially as a Londoner going to LA, it felt like that city is so flimsy. There's something like it might collapse at any minute. It just, because everything's so young and everything's like on an earthquake fault line, and just the whole thing feels like. And I felt that really deep in my belly as a Londoner moving there, just because London's been here for millennia, and LA, just everything about it. So I wanted to get that across in the film as well, the sort of the scumminess and the temporary.
What about the inspiration for the conspiracy theories? I mean, that's kind of makes the film really weird. I mean, and also really LA as well. You
that's
kind
right.
of how important was that character? And
Gary, the conspiracy, I mean, California is definitely ripe for like millenarian thinking, and people just, because you've got the freedom there to have whatever wacky beliefs you want. I think it felt like California made sense as a place where that, and also because of the whole the sort of utopian tech thing going on in Silicon Valley as well. So that's very much happening in California anyway. And I know Paul reads a lot of, he was inspired by a guy called Nick Land, who he was, I think he's an accelerationist thinker. And I'm not sure if Paul would necessarily subscribe to the guy's beliefs, but he's definitely read a bunch of his stuff. And he was just interested in kind of the religious aspect, the way that technological progress seems to have a kind of religious aspect to it, and people are kind of, you know, it's a niche thing, but it's implicit even in Google, Facebook, Apple's rhetoric. There's a kind of implicit like religiosity in what they're saying and in what they sell it and the way they sell it to us. There's almost, and then there's talk of a singularity, like a kind of rapture where everything, you know, we're all going to religiously be beamed up into this technological heaven. And that's just in the air. When you live in California, that's just in the air. So I think it kind of came from the place.
I got also a feeling of, you know, we all know about gender dysphoria, but I got a feeling that the film sort of hints at body dysphoria, you know, where Paul kind of sees the power he gets through having this tech limb. Were you aware of sort of talking this, you know, the film discussing that sort of area? Because it's kind of like we've got a lot of gender identity things going on at the moment.
Of course,
how technology sort of merges into that.
Yeah, I mean, I've never discussed it in depth with Paul, but there was definitely the idea that, because there's a character who's trans and there's also the masculinity in crisis at the same time, and there's also the sort of the other form of trans, which is transhumanism, you know, very different, but what they all have in common is a kind of yourself and your body are two separate things, and there's a sort of, you know, so I don't think he was trying to make any statement with it, but it's just a kind of a mood where people are getting separate. Just naturally, modern life is separating us from our physical bodies in some kind of way. It's kind of like a low-lying theme, really.
So what are the plans for the film? Have you got interest in the US for the film? I
believe so. Yeah, Paul's shopping it around at the moment, so I think we'll see what happens, basically. Yeah, but FrightFest is a triumph. We're just delighted to have it here, and look forward to seeing what people think of it tonight.
Well, we're delighted to have it, and I think it will really surprise and shock and delight a lot of people, I hope. I mean, because I think people will see the John Waters connection, sort of Tetsuo meets John Waters. I mean, is that a kind of accurate sort of...
Yeah, that was, it's funny because I completely agree with that, but I haven't actually seen that many John Waters films, and I haven't seen Tetsuo either. But I'm aware of them. I'm aware of all these things, and so they were definitely sort of in the mix when we were talking about it, but I would never describe myself as like a super fan of either of those things. But yeah, like, you know, obviously, like anytime you talk about like machine stuff, then like Japanese manga comes into it. And I think like a lot of the John Waters tone, if indeed people think there is that, it just comes from like doing really like cheap, dirty films. Really, I think there's like that sort of naturally arises.
And there's also that feeling that the actors are kind of making it up as they go along, kind of thing, and adding a sort of kind of lewd sort of just kind of that sort of bad taste thing going on.
Yeah, totally. The actors loved that. We didn't have to push them very hard at all. They were just like delighted to like. I think part of the thing when you do like a cheap film, you've got to get production value from other stuff.
Yeah.
And like smut is one of those ways. Basically, you just like let people be really like.
But I also think the choice of the characters, because there's certainly characters that you would see in a John Waters film. The way they dress, the sort of alternative look to them, or just that sort of not really belonging on planet Earth.
Yeah.
How did you cast? Was it hard to cast?
It wasn't. I'm trying to remember. It was quite a difficult process for me because I was in London for the whole casting process, so I never met anybody in person.
Right, okay.
Paul was out there with Ali, the other producer, and the two of them. A lot of it was friends. We really tried to keep the production either friends or friends of friends, or like old buddies from film school, or you know, things like that. So a lot of the friends they happen to move in circles where people are just a bit like that, and I think they were like, oh yeah, our mate, you know, thingy would be great in this role, and it was just, you know, plucking people. A lot of them hadn't acted before, and it was just like, it was about finding the types and like the right type of people, and just trusting that, you know, that they could be good on camera.
It must have been a challenge as a director, kind of not casting your own movie and then going to another country to film it.
Yeah,
meeting. I thought the actor you chose to play the conspirator was brilliant.
Oh, Gary is played by Jamie. Oh, great! Yeah,
But was that just luck? That were you just?
We were still having conversations. It wasn't completely out of my control, but Paul would be sort of racking his brains because obviously I don't have any contacts out there. So Paul would be racking his brains, going, "Oh, what do you think about this guy?" and sending me photos, and so we did have a few other people in the mix for Russell and for Gary. And as soon as we saw Jamie, because Jamie's an old buddy of Paul's, and as soon as I saw like he's just like got this incredible physicality, and the character needed to be a kind of like alpha male for Russell to look up to, and Jamie is a good foot taller than Russell, and like just like this stocky, powerful guy. And so that like physically he worked. He was super into the part.
Well, you got the sense that he was military. You know, you got the sense that he was ex-military. He knew how to kill. He could kill someone with his bare hands, sort of thing.
Yeah.
We're sort of, to wrap up, I just wanted to ask you if there's anything you're doing next. Are you now you're back in London?
Yeah.
Is the plan to make your next film here, or are you going to be lured back for Laguna Avenue 2?
I could be lured. I mean, I would be willing to be lured back there, definitely, because actually I think there's something really fruitful about being a foreigner and making a film in a country that's not yours. And I think that like just gives it a mood that is quite hard to recreate if you live there. So I would. I know Paul has at least 2 scripts on the go. Either of which I would love to direct if they go. But in the meantime, I'm just working on stuff here. I've actually got I've got a feel-good musical as my next project. Right. I'm going completely the opposite direction.
Oh, that's disappointing for FrightFest fans.
Well, after that, there's more to come after that. But I wanted to try. I just love musicals as well.
Right.
So I want to try that and just make something that like my grandmother would like or children would like, and just see like because Laguna is such a niche prospect. I would want to see if I can appeal to a broad range of people. That's the short. That should be finished by the end of this year, and then I'm developing a script which I want to sort of take the Laguna approach but apply it to England.
Okay.
And sort of so that's the long-term feature, the next
Kentish
feature
Town.
I want to do. Kentish Town, or Kilburn, or anywhere in North London.
Yeah. Or Kilburn Avenue, you see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, anywhere where there's like sort of grotty, like suburban edgelands going on. So I'm actually thinking of like somewhere down on the edge of South London. Somewhere would be a good place to make the next feature.
Well, good luck with all your future projects, and
Yeah.
good luck with Laguna Avenue. Look forward to seeing who picks it up and how it's distributed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, pleasure. Thanks for having us.